The October wind cut through the Wyoming Territory like a dull blade, carrying with it the scent of dying grass and the promise of an early winter. Samuel McKenna pulled his worn coat tighter around his shoulders as he guided his horse along the rutted Cheyenne Trail, the packhorse behind him, laden with supplies from Bitter Creek. The town had been as unwelcoming as always. Suspicious glances, whispered conversations that died when he approached, and prices that seemed to climb higher each time he needed something for the ranch. Sam's weathered hands gripped the reins tighter as he thought about the bills tucked in his coat pocket. The drought had been merciless this year, and he'd lost nearly a third of his cattle. At 42, he felt every one of his years etched into his face by wind and worry. The small ranch that he and Martha had built together was slowly dying, just like everything else he'd tried to hold on to since the fever took her 3 winters ago. The trail ahead curved around a cluster of weathered boulders, and Sam's horse suddenly snorted and shied to one side. Something was wrong. His hand instinctively moved to the Winchester rifle secured to his saddle as he scanned the sparse landscape. Indians had been active in the territory lately. The cavalry had been through just last week, chasing reports of Apache raiders moving north from Colorado. That's when he saw her. A small figure lay crumpled against the base of a large boulder, barely visible in the fading afternoon light. Sam's first instinct was caution. It could be a trap, a way to lure unwary travelers into an ambush. But as he drew closer, his heart clenched. It was a child, no more than 8 or 9 years old, her small body curled into a ball like a wounded animal seeking shelter. Sam dismounted slowly, his boots crunching on the dry earth. The girl didn't move, didn't even seem to be breathing. Her clothes were torn and dirty, traditional Apache dress that had seen better days. Her long black hair was matted with dirt and blood, and her exposed skin was marked with scratches and bruises. She was unconscious, her lips cracked and pale from dehydration. "Easy there, little one," Sam whispered, kneeling beside her. He gently touched her shoulder, and she stirred slightly, her eyelids fluttering. When her eyes opened, they were dark as midnight and filled with terror. She tried to scramble away, but her small body was too weak to move. "Shh, it's all right," Sam said softly, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "I'm not going to hurt you." The girl stared at him with those huge, frightened eyes, and Sam felt something crack inside his chest. He'd seen that look before, in Martha's eyes during those final days when the fever consumed her, when she knew she was dying, and there was nothing he could do to save her. But this child was still alive, barely, but alive. Sam slowly reached for his canteen, moving carefully so as not to startle her further. "Water," he said, unscrewing the cap. "You need water." The girl's eyes fixed on the canteen, and she tried to reach for it with trembling hands. Sam helped her sit up, supporting her small frame as she drank greedily. Water spilled down her chin, but she kept drinking until Sam gently pulled the canteen away. "Not too fast," he cautioned. "You'll make yourself sick." The girl wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and looked up at him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Sam found himself wondering what horrors this child had witnessed. What had brought her to this desolate place alone and near death? "Where's your family?" he asked gently, though he suspected she might not understand English. The girl's expression crumbled, and tears began to stream down her dirt-stained cheeks. She spoke in Apache, her voice barely above a whisper, but Sam didn't need to understand the words to know their meaning. Her family was gone. Sam looked around the empty landscape, then back at the girl. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Soon it would be full dark, and the temperature would drop below freezing. The child wouldn't survive another night out here alone. "Listen to me," Sam said, crouching down so they were eye to eye. "I don't know what happened to your people, but I can't leave you here. You'll die if you stay." The girl watched him warily, understanding the gravity in his tone if not his words. Sam made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "I'm going to take you home with me," he said, "to my ranch. I'll feed you, give you a warm place to sleep." He paused, then added with quiet conviction, "I promise you'll never starve again." The girl didn't understand all his words, but something in his voice, in his eyes, seemed to reach her. She nodded slightly, a gesture so small it might have been missed by someone not watching closely. Sam carefully lifted the girl into his arms, surprised by how light she was, too light for a child her age. She was little more than skin and bones. As he settled her on his horse in front of him, wrapping his coat around her small frame, he wondered what he was getting himself into. The ride back to the ranch was silent, except for the steady clip-clop of the horse's hooves and the whisper of wind through the sagebrush. The girl leaned against Sam's chest, her breathing gradually steadying as exhaustion claimed her. By the time they reached the modest ranch house, she was fast asleep. Sam carried her inside, past the cold fireplace and the table where he'd eaten alone for 3 years. He laid her gently on Martha's old rocking chair and quickly lit the oil lamp. In the warm yellow light, he could see the full extent of her condition, the hollows in her cheeks, the way her clothes hung loose on her small frame, the haunted look that even sleep couldn't erase from her young face. As he prepared a simple meal of warm broth and soft bread, Sam found himself talking to the sleeping child. "I don't know your name, little one, or where you come from, but I meant what I said out there. You're safe now." Outside, the wind howled across the empty prairie, carrying with it the first hints of the harsh winter to come. But inside the small ranch house, for the first time in 3 years, Sam McKenna didn't feel completely alone. The girl stirred in the chair, and Sam knelt beside her with the bowl of broth. "Easy now," he whispered. "You're safe, I promise." It was a promise that would test everything Sam thought he knew about himself, his community, and the world he lived in. But looking at this small wounded child, he knew he would keep it no matter what it cost him. The first 3 days were the hardest. The girl, Sam had taken to calling her Little Bird until he could learn her real name, would barely eat and refused to leave the corner of the main room where she'd positioned herself like a cornered animal. She watched Sam's every movement with those dark, intelligent eyes, ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. Sam had seen enough wounded animals to recognize the signs. Trust would have to be earned, one small gesture at a time. On the 4th morning, as November's chill settled over the Wyoming Territory, Sam found her standing by the window, staring out at the endless prairie. She was still wearing the torn Apache dress, though Sam had managed to convince her to let him wash and mend it while she slept. "See anything interesting out there?" Sam asked softly, approaching slowly with a steaming cup of coffee and a plate of eggs. The girl turned at the sound of his voice, and for the first time, Sam caught a glimpse of curiosity in her expression, rather than pure fear. She pointed toward the horizon where his small herd of cattle grazed in the distance. "Those are my cows," Sam explained, setting the food on the table. "Not many left, but they're good animals." He gestured for her to sit, but she remained standing, still wary. Sam had been thinking about this moment for days. He pulled out a small piece of paper and a pencil, then drew a simple picture of a cow. The girl's eyes widened slightly. It was the first real sign of interest she'd shown. "Cow," Sam said, pointing to the drawing, then to the animals outside. "Cow." The girl looked from the paper to the window, then back to Sam. In a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "Wakia." Sam smiled, the first genuine smile he'd felt in weeks. "Wakia," he repeated, mangling the pronunciation. "That's what you call them." For the next hour, they sat at the table, Sam drawing simple pictures while the girl offered the Apache words. House became ki, horse became we, and water became tu. With each exchange, the rigid tension in her small shoulders seemed to ease just a little. It was during this impromptu lesson that Sam learned her name. She pointed to herself and said, "Aiyana." "Aiyana," Sam repeated, and she nodded approvingly at his pronunciation. "That's a beautiful name." "I'm Sam." "Sam," she said carefully, testing the foreign sound on her tongue. From that day forward, something shifted between them. Aiyana began to eat more regularly, though she still started at sudden noises, and positioned herself near the door during meals. She helped Sam with small tasks around the ranch, feeding the chickens, gathering eggs, sorting through the meager supplies. Her movements were graceful and purposeful, and Sam found himself amazed by her quick intelligence and natural understanding of the animals. But it was the nightmares that revealed the true depth of her trauma. The first time Sam heard her screaming in the night, he'd rushed to her side, only to find her thrashing in her sleep, calling out in Apache. When he gently shook her awake, she'd looked at him with such terror that it took several minutes for her to recognize where she was. "It's all right," Sam had whispered, sitting on the edge of the bed. "You're safe. It was just a dream." But Sam knew they weren't just dreams. They were memories. Over the following weeks, as the first snow began to dust the prairie, Aiyana slowly began to open up. Her English improved rapidly. She had an ear for languages that amazed Sam, and in broken sentences, she began to tell him pieces of her story. Her band had been camped near a stream when the soldiers came at dawn. Her father had been away hunting, and her mother had hidden her in a root cellar before. She never finished that sentence, but Sam understood. The soldiers had been thorough in their work. "I ran," she told him one evening, as they sat by the fire. "Ran for many days. No food, no water. Thought I would die like—" Again, she couldn't finish. Sam felt a familiar anger building in his chest, the same rage he'd felt when the fever took Martha, and there was nothing he could do to fight it. But this was different. This was something people had done to other people, and it made him sick. "You don't have to talk about it," Sam said gently. "Not until you're ready." But Aiyana shook her head. "Need to remember. Need to tell someone, or they are truly gone." That night, Sam sat up late thinking about what she'd said. He thought about Martha, about how he'd buried his grief so deep that sometimes he could barely remember the sound of her laugh. Maybe Aiyana was right. Maybe remembering was the only way to keep the dead alive. The first real test of their fragile new relationship came when Sam's brother, Robert, arrived unexpectedly on a bitter December morning. Sam heard the horse approaching and saw Aiyana immediately tense, her hand moving instinctively toward the kitchen knife she'd taken to keeping nearby. "It's all right," Sam said quickly. "It's just my brother." But when Robert McKenna strode into the house, his expression turned thunderous at the sight of Aiyana. "Jesus Christ, Sam," he said, not bothering to lower his voice. "What the hell is that doing here?" "Her name is Aiyana," Sam said evenly, positioning himself between his brother and the girl. "And she's staying." Robert was everything Sam wasn't. Successful, married, respected in town. He owned the largest ranch in the territory and had political connections that reached all the way to Washington. He was also the kind of man who believed Indians were barely human. "Have you lost your mind?" Robert hissed. "That's an Apache savage living in your house. They're killing white folks all over the territory, and you're playing house with one of them?" "She's just a child," Sam said, his voice hardening. "She was dying when I found her." "Should have let her die," Robert snapped. "Would have been a mercy for everyone involved." Sam felt his hands clench into fists. "Get out! Sam, listen to me." "I said get out," Sam roared, and Aiyana flinched at the sudden violence in his voice. "Get out of my house and don't come back until you can show some basic human decency." Robert stared at his brother in shock. "The folks in town aren't going to stand for this, Sam. You keep that Apache around, and you're going to have real trouble." "Then I guess I'll have trouble," Sam said quietly. After Robert left, Sam found Aiyana standing in the corner where she'd first hidden, trembling. "I go," she whispered. "I bring trouble for Sam." Sam knelt down in front of her, his heart breaking at the resignation in her voice. "No," he said firmly. "You're not going anywhere. This is your home now." "But your brother—" "My brother is wrong," Sam interrupted. "And so is anyone else who thinks you don't belong here." Aiyana looked up at him with those dark eyes, and Sam saw something he'd never seen before. Hope, fragile and tentative, but real. "You promise?" she asked. Sam thought about the oath he'd sworn on the Cheyenne Trail, about the child he'd found dying in the wilderness, about the young woman she was becoming. He thought about Martha, about the family they'd never had, about the emptiness that had filled his life since she died. "I promise," he said, "forever." As the winter deepened and the snow piled higher around the small ranch house, Sam and Aiyana settled into a routine that felt almost like family. But beyond the circle of warmth and safety they'd created, storm clouds were gathering. Robert's warning about the townspeople hadn't been idle. Sam could feel the weight of their disapproval whenever he ventured into Bitter Creek. The real test was coming, and Sam knew it. The question was whether his promise would be strong enough to weather the storm. The trouble started on a February morning when Sam took Aiyana to town for the first time. She had grown in the 4 months since he'd found her, not just physically, though she'd gained weight and her cheeks had filled out, but in confidence. She walked straighter now, spoke English with increasing fluency, and had developed a wry sense of humor that reminded Sam painfully of Martha. "Do I look like a white girl?" Aiyana asked as they rode toward Bitter Creek, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. Sam glanced at her sitting beside him on the wagon bench. She wore one of Martha's old dresses, carefully altered to fit her smaller frame, and her long black hair was braided in the style Sam had learned from watching his wife prepare for church. But her bronze skin and sharp features would mark her as Apache to anyone who looked closely. "You look like Aiyana," Sam said simply. "That's enough." But as they rolled down Bitter Creek's main street, Sam felt the weight of every stare, heard the whispers that followed in their wake. He'd expected hostility. Robert had made sure word had spread about the savage living at the McKenna ranch. What he hadn't expected was the naked hatred in some of the faces they passed. Their first stop was Murphy's General Store, where Sam needed supplies and Aiyana needed proper winter clothes. The store fell silent when they entered, conversations dying mid-sentence as every head turned to stare at the Apache girl. "Morning, Murphy," Sam said to the store owner, a portly man with thinning hair and shrewd eyes. Sam, Murphy replied cautiously, his gaze fixed on Aiyana. Heard you had some company out at your place. This is Aiyana, Sam said, resting his hand protectively on the girl's shoulder. She needs a proper winter coat. Murphy's face reddened. Now see here, Sam. This is a respectable establishment. I can't have her kind in here. It's bad for business. Sam felt his jaw tighten. Her kind? She's a 12-year-old girl who needs warm clothes. She's Apache, Murphy said, as if that explained everything. They've been raiding homesteads south of here. Killed the Patterson family just last week. She didn't kill anyone, Sam said, his voice dangerously quiet. She was dying when I found her. Apache is Apache, called out a voice from the back of the store. Sam turned to see Edgar Grimsby, the town's self-appointed moral authority and owner of the largest saloon. Can't trust a one of them. Other voices joined in, and Sam felt the mood in the store shift from uncomfortable to dangerous. Aiyana pressed closer to his side, and he could feel her trembling. We'll take our business elsewhere, Sam said, turning toward the door. Good, Murphy called after them. And don't come back with her. Outside, Sam helped Aiyana into the wagon, his hands shaking with anger. I'm sorry, he said. I hoped. You hoped they would be different, Aiyana said softly. Like you. People can change, Sam said, but even to his own ears, the words sounded hollow. They tried 2 more stores with similar results. Word traveled fast in a small town, and by the time they reached the 3rd shop, the owner was standing in the doorway with his arms crossed, clearly prepared to turn them away. It was at the church that things turned truly ugly. Sam had attended services sporadically since Martha's death, but he'd thought that Pastor Williams, at least, would show Christian charity. He was wrong. I'm sorry, Sam, the pastor said, blocking their path to the church steps, but I can't allow her inside. It would upset the congregation. She's a child, Sam said, his patience finally snapping. A child who's been through more hell than most adults. If anyone needs to be in church, it's her. She's a heathen, Pastor Williams replied, an Apache savage. Perhaps when she's been properly converted and civilized, but not before. Jesus ate with tax collectors and sinners, Sam shot back. I don't recall him checking anyone's bloodline at the door. The pastor's face darkened. Don't quote scripture at me, Sam McKenna. That girl is the spawn of murderers and thieves. She has no place among God-fearing people. A crowd had gathered, drawn by the raised voices. Sam recognized most of the faces. People he'd known for years. People who had attended Martha's funeral and offered their condolences. Now they stared at him with a mixture of disgust and pity. You've lost your mind, Sam, called out Mrs. Henderson, whose husband served on the town council. Bringing that pampered thing home into our community. She's not a thing, Sam said, his voice carrying across the crowd. She's a human being, a child, and she's under my protection. Protection from what? Sneered Grimsby, pushing through the crowd. From justice? From paying for what her people did to decent white folks? From people like you, Sam said, his hand dropping to the gun at his hip. The crowd went silent. Everyone knew Sam McKenna was a fair man, slow to anger but dangerous when pushed too far. They also knew he'd been cavalry before settling down with Martha, and his reputation with a gun was well established. Are you threatening me, Sam? Grimsby asked, but his voice lacked conviction. I'm protecting a child, Sam said quietly. Just like I'd protect any child from a mob of ignorant bullies. That's enough. The voice cut through the tension like a whip crack. Sam turned to see his brother Robert pushing through the crowd, his face grim. Sam, you need to come with me. Now. I'm not going anywhere with you, Sam said. Yes, you are, Robert said, his voice carrying the authority of his position as the territory's largest landowner. Because if you don't, these good people are going to take matters into their own hands, and I don't think you want that. Sam looked around at the faces surrounding them, faces twisted with hatred and fear. He saw men fingering gun butts, women clutching their children protectively, teenagers with the cruel eagerness of those looking for violence. Sam, Aiyana whispered, tugging at his sleeve. We should go. For a moment Sam considered fighting. The rage burning in his chest wanted an outlet, wanted to make these people understand what they were doing. But then he looked down at Aiyana, at the fear in her eyes, at the way she was trying to make herself smaller, invisible. You're right, he said finally. We should go. The crowd parted as they walked back to the wagon, but the silence was more ominous than any shouting would have been. Sam helped Aiyana up and climbed beside her, feeling the weight of every hostile stare. This isn't over, Sam, Robert said quietly as they prepared to leave. These people aren't going to forget this. And next time I might not be here to calm things down. I never asked you to calm anything down, Sam replied. And you're right. This isn't over. The ride home was silent, except for the creak of the wagon wheels and the whisper of wind through the bare branches. Aiyana sat straight-backed beside him, her hands folded in her lap, but Sam could see the tears she was fighting to hold back. I'm sorry, he said finally. I hoped they would be better than that. My grandfather told me stories, Aiyana said quietly, about the time before the white man came, when the world was bigger and there was room for everyone. He said the world grew smaller when fear became stronger than hope. Sam felt something twist in his chest at her words. Your grandfather sounds like a wise man. He was, Aiyana said, before the soldiers killed him. They rode the rest of the way in silence, but Sam's mind was churning. He thought about the faces in the crowd, about the hatred he'd seen there, about Robert's warning. He thought about the promise he'd made on the Cheyenne Trail and what it was going to cost him to keep it. That night, as Aiyana slept, Sam sat at his kitchen table cleaning his rifle. He'd seen enough of the world to know that some people couldn't be reasoned with, couldn't be changed by words or good intentions. Some people only understood force. Outside, the February wind howled across the prairie, carrying with it the scent of snow and the promise of harder days ahead. Sam McKenna had made his choice on the Cheyenne Trail, and now he was going to live with the consequences. But as he listened to Aiyana's peaceful breathing from the next room, he knew he'd made the right choice. Some promises were worth fighting for, no matter what it cost. The question was, would his neighbors give him the chance to keep it? The Apache came with the spring thaw. Sam spotted them first, 4 riders on the ridge overlooking his ranch, their silhouettes stark against the pale March sky. They sat motionless on their horses, watching, waiting. Sam had been expecting this moment for months, but his heart still hammered against his ribs as he set down his coffee cup and reached for his rifle. Aiyana, he called softly. She appeared in the doorway of the house, now 13 and taller than when he'd found her. Her English perfect, but her Apache instincts still sharp. She'd sensed the tension before he'd even spoken. They've come for me, she said simply, her dark eyes finding the distant riders. Sam nodded, his throat tight. Looks like it. For a long moment, they stood together in the morning silence, rancher and Apache girl, watching the riders who had traveled hundreds of miles to find her. Sam had always known this day would come, but knowing and being ready were different things entirely. What do you want to do? Sam asked. Aiyana was quiet for so long that Sam thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know. The riders began their descent, moving down the slope with the fluid grace of people born to the saddle. As they drew closer, Sam could make out details. Traditional Apache dress, war paint, weapons. These weren't reservation Indians coming to negotiate. These were warriors. Get inside, Sam said, but Aiyana shook her head. No, if they're my people, I should face them. And if they're not? Aiyana's hand moved to the knife at her belt, a habit she'd developed since that day in town. Then we faced them together. The lead rider was a man in his 40s, his face marked with the scars of many battles. His eyes swept over the ranch, taking in the small house, the barn, the meager cattle herd. When his gaze fell on Aiyana, his expression shifted from wariness to something deeper. Recognition, relief, and anger all mixed together. He spoke in Apache, his voice carrying across the yard. Aiyana responded, her words halting at first, then flowing more freely as the language of her childhood returned. Sam couldn't understand what they were saying, but he could read the emotions playing across their faces. The conversation went on for several minutes, voices rising and falling, sometimes heated, sometimes tender. Finally, the warrior dismounted and approached Aiyana. He placed his hands on her shoulders, examining her face as if memorizing it. This is my uncle, Aiyana said to Sam, switching to English. My father's brother. His name is Nalnish. Sam nodded respectfully. Tell him he's welcome here. But when Aiyana translated, Nalnish's expression hardened. He spoke sharply, gesturing toward Sam, then toward the horizon where the town of Bitter Creek lay hidden in the distance. He says the white man's world has poisoned me, Aiyana translated, her voice carefully neutral. He says I dress like them, speak like them, smell like them. He says I've forgotten who I am. Sam felt his jaw tighten. And what do you say? Aiyana looked at her uncle, then at Sam, and Sam saw the pain in her eyes, the terrible weight of being caught between two worlds. I tell him that you saved my life, that you kept me from starving, that you've been kinder to me than anyone since my parents died." Nalnish spoke again, his voice growing more insistent. The other 3 warriors had dismounted now, and Sam could feel the tension building like a storm about to break. "He says kindness from a white man is like honey from a snake," Aiyana translated. "Sweet at first, but deadly in the end. He says you've made me weak, made me forget the ways of our people." "Have I?" Sam asked quietly. Aiyana was quiet for a long moment. "No," she said finally, "but I'm not the same girl who was left to die on the Cheyenne Trail. I can't be." Nalnish spoke again, and this time his words carried the weight of command. The other warriors moved closer, their hands resting on their weapons. "He says I must choose," Aiyana said, her voice breaking slightly. "I can come with them now and try to remember who I was, or I can stay here and be dead to my people forever." Sam felt something cold settle in his stomach. "And if you refuse to choose? Then they'll take me anyway," Aiyana said. "It's Apache law. A child belongs with their people. Even if she doesn't want to go." Aiyana looked at him with eyes that held too much knowledge for someone her age. "Apache law doesn't ask what a child wants. It asks what's best for the tribe." Sam looked at the 4 warriors, calculating odds and distances. He was outnumbered, but he was on his own ground and he had cover. More importantly, he had something they didn't: the absolute certainty that he would die before he let them take Aiyana against her will. "What do you want to do?" he asked again. Aiyana closed her eyes, and when she opened them, Sam saw a decision there. "I want to talk to them. Alone. Will you trust me?" Every instinct Sam had screamed against it, but he nodded. "I'll be right here." Aiyana walked toward her uncle, and the 2 of them moved away from the others, speaking in low, urgent tones. Sam watched from the porch, his rifle ready, but not raised, trying to read the conversation from their body language. It went on for nearly an hour. Sometimes Aiyana's voice rose in what sounded like argument. Sometimes Nalnish gestured angrily toward the house, toward Sam. Once, Sam saw Aiyana wipe tears from her eyes. Finally, they returned to the group. Nalnish looked grim, but there was something else in his expression, respect perhaps, or resignation. "I told him about the promise you made," Aiyana said to Sam. "About how you found me dying and swore I'd never starve again. I told him how you've honored that promise every day since." Sam nodded, not trusting his voice. "I also told him about the people in town," Aiyana continued, "about how they hate me, how they want to drive me away. I told him that the white man's world isn't any more welcoming than he thinks it is. And what did he say? He said that makes it even more important for me to come home. He said a Apache girl can't live in a world that doesn't want her." Sam felt his heart sink. "So you're going with them?" "No," Aiyana said firmly. "I'm not." The warriors stirred at her words, and Sam saw hands move toward weapons, but Aiyana held up her hand and spoke in Apache, her voice carrying an authority that surprised everyone, including Sam. "I told them that I am Apache, and I will always be Apache," she said, still speaking to the warriors but translating for Sam. "But I also told them that this man," she pointed to Sam, "is my family now. He has fed me when I was hungry, sheltered me when I was cold, and protected me when I was afraid. He has been a father to me when my own father could not." Nalnish spoke sharply, but Aiyana cut him off with a gesture that was pure Apache nobility. "I told him that forcing me to choose between my blood family and my chosen family is like asking me to cut out my own heart. I told him that if he truly loves me, he won't ask me to do it." The silence stretched out like a held breath. Sam could hear his own heartbeat, could feel the sweat on his palms despite the cool morning air. Finally Nalnish spoke, his voice heavy with emotion. Aiyana listened, then nodded slowly. "He says he understands," she translated. "He says that love sometimes means letting go, even when it breaks your heart. He says that my father would be proud of the woman I'm becoming, even if she's not the woman he expected." "Does that mean—" "It means I can choose," Aiyana said. "And I choose to stay." The relief that flooded through Sam was so intense it made his knees weak, but he could see the pain in Nalnish's eyes, the struggle between duty and love. "But there's a condition," Aiyana continued. "He says that if I ever change my mind, if I ever want to come home, I only have to send word. The door will always be open." Sam nodded. "That's fair." Nalnish stepped forward and placed his hand on Sam's shoulder. When he spoke, his English was heavily accented but clear. "You keep promise," he said. "You keep her safe, you keep her strong. You remember she is Apache, even if she live in white man's world." "I will," Sam promised. "And you," Nalnish said to Aiyana, You remember who you are. You remember where you come from. You are bridge between two worlds. That is heavy burden, but it is also great honor. Aiyana nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'll remember. The warriors prepared to leave, but before they mounted their horses, Nalnish spoke one more time to Aiyana. She listened, then smiled through her tears. What did he say? Sam asked. He said that my Apache name is Aiyana, eternal blossom. He said that's what I am, a flower that blooms in any soil, in any season. He said that's my gift and my strength. As the warriors rode away, Sam and Aiyana stood watching until they disappeared over the ridge. The silence that followed was different from the morning's tension. It was the silence of a decision made and accepted. Any regrets? Sam asked. Aiyana considered the question seriously. Ask me in 10 years, she said finally. When I know what kind of woman I've become. Sam smiled. I already know what kind of woman you're becoming. You're becoming the kind who keeps her promises, just like her old man. Is that what you are now? Aiyana asked with a slight smile. My old man? If you'll have me, Sam said. Aiyana threw her arms around him, and Sam felt something settle in his chest that had been restless for years. They stood there in the morning sunshine, rancher and Apache daughter, having chosen each other against all odds and expectations. The world might not understand their family, but it was theirs nonetheless, and that was enough. 5 years had passed since the Apache warriors rode away from the McKenna ranch, and the world had changed in ways both subtle and profound. Aiyana was 18 now, no longer the frightened child Sam had found dying on the Cheyenne Trail, but a young woman of remarkable strength and grace. She moved through both worlds, Apache and white, with a confidence that commanded respect, even from those who might have preferred to hate her. The ranch had prospered under their joint efforts. Aiyana's understanding of the land, inherited from generations of Apache wisdom, had helped Sam make better decisions about grazing and water rights. Her skills with horses were legendary throughout the territory, and even the most prejudiced ranchers grudgingly admitted that the McKenna horses were the finest they'd ever seen. But success hadn't made their lives easier. If anything, it had made them more complicated. Sam stood on the porch of their expanded house, watching Aiyana work with a young stallion in the corral. The morning sun caught the copper highlights in her black hair, and her movements had the fluid grace of someone completely at home with animals. She was beautiful in a way that drew stares wherever they went, not just because of her exotic features, but because of the confidence and intelligence that radiated from her. That confidence was about to be tested in ways Sam had never imagined. Sam! The voice came from the road, and Sam turned to see a rider approaching at full gallop. As the man drew closer, Sam recognized Tom Bradley, a decent enough fellow who worked for the territorial government. What's the emergency, Tom? Sam asked as Bradley reined in his lathered horse. It's not an emergency exactly, Bradley said, catching his breath. But you need to know. There's a federal marshal coming. Name's Jonathan Pierce. He's got papers. Sam felt his stomach clench. What kind of papers? The kind that say Aiyana needs to be relocated to a reservation, Bradley said quietly. There's been pressure from Washington, something about proper placement of indigenous persons and ensuring cultural preservation. She's not going to any reservation, Sam said flatly. Sam, you don't understand. This isn't some local sheriff you can face down. This is federal law. Pierce has the authority to take her by force if necessary. Sam's hand dropped instinctively to his gun. Let him try. That's not the way, Bradley said urgently. You fight the federal government, you'll lose. And they'll take her anyway, probably put you in prison besides. Then what do you suggest? Bradley glanced around nervously, then leaned closer. There might be another way. Pierce is a reasonable man from what I hear. Maybe if Aiyana could prove she's integrated, married to a white man, contributing to the community, maybe then he'd see reason. Sam stared at him. You're suggesting she marry someone to avoid being sent to a reservation? I'm suggesting she marry you, Bradley said quietly. The words hit Sam like a physical blow. The thought had never. Aiyana was his daughter in every way that mattered, but she wasn't actually his daughter, and she was 18 now, a grown woman by any measure. Sam started, then stopped. That's complicated. More complicated than watching federal marshals drag her away? Bradley asked. Before Sam could answer, Aiyana appeared at his elbow. She'd approached so quietly that neither man had heard her coming, another skill from her Apache heritage. How long until this marshal arrives? She asked calmly. Bradley looked surprised that she'd overheard, but answered honestly. 3 days, maybe 4. Thank you for the warning, Aiyana said. "We'll handle it from here." After Bradley left, Sam and Aiyana sat on the porch in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The afternoon was peaceful, with only the sound of cattle lowing in the distance and the whisper of wind through the grass. "So," Aiyana said finally, "marriage." Sam felt his face flush. "Aiyana, I would never expect." "I know," she said simply. "You've never been anything but honorable with me. But Tom Bradley isn't wrong about the practical aspects. There has to be another way." "Is there?" Aiyana asked. "You know what those reservations are like. Barely enough food, terrible conditions, people dying of diseases that shouldn't kill anyone. And once I'm there, they'll never let me leave." Sam had heard the stories. The reservations were little better than prisons, designed more to contain than to help. "But marriage," Sam said. "Aiyana, you're 18. You should marry for love, have children, build a real family." "Haven't we already built a real family?" she asked. The question hung in the air between them. Sam thought about the years they'd spent together, the quiet dinners and shared work, the way she'd nursed him through pneumonia 2 winters ago, the way he'd taught her to read legal documents and manage accounts. They were partners in every way that mattered except one. "What if I said yes?" Aiyana asked quietly. "What if I said that marrying you wouldn't be a sacrifice, but a choice I could live with?" Sam looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not the frightened child he'd rescued, but a woman of extraordinary strength and wisdom, a woman who deserved better than a marriage of convenience to a man old enough to be her father. "You deserve love," Sam said. "Real love, the kind that sets your heart on fire and makes you feel like you can conquer the world." Aiyana smiled. "I've had that love for 5 years," she said softly. "It's just not the kind the world expects." Before Sam could respond, she stood and walked to the edge of the porch. "There's something else to consider," she said. "If we do this, if we present ourselves as a married couple, we'll be lying to the world for the rest of our lives. Can you live with that?" Sam thought about it. Could he live with a marriage based on necessity rather than passion? Could he watch Aiyana sacrifice her chance at romantic love to stay safe? But then, he thought about the alternative. He thought about Aiyana being dragged away by federal marshals, about her wasting away on some distant reservation, about never seeing her again. "The promise I made on the Cheyenne Trail," Sam said slowly, "it wasn't just about food. It was about keeping you safe, keeping you free. If this is what it takes to honor that promise, then you'll do it? If you're sure it's what you want." Aiyana turned back to him, and Sam saw something in her eyes he'd never seen before. Not love in the romantic sense, but something deeper and more lasting. Trust, partnership, the kind of bond that could sustain a lifetime. "I'm sure," she said. 3 days later, Marshal Jonathan Pierce arrived with 2 deputies and a wagon full of legal documents. He was a thin, serious man with pale eyes and the kind of rigid bearing that suggested military service. Sam and Aiyana met him on the porch, standing close together with matching gold bands on their fingers. "Marshal Pierce," Sam said formally. "I'm Samuel McKenna, and this is my wife, Aiyana." Pierce's eyes narrowed as he studied the rings, the way they stood together, the small details that suggested an established household. "When were you married?" 2 days ago, Aiyana said smoothly, "by Pastor Williams in Bitter Creek." It was a lie, of course. They'd been married by a circuit judge who asked no uncomfortable questions and cared more about his fee than the details. But Pierce didn't need to know that. "I see," Pierce said. "And how long have you been acquainted?" "I've lived here for 5 years, Aiyana said. "Sam found me after my family was killed and took me in. We've been growing closer over time." Another lie, but one that skirted close enough to the truth to be believable. Pierce spent the next hour asking questions, examining documents, and generally trying to find some legal reason to take Aiyana anyway. But the paperwork was in order. Marriage certificate, property deeds showing joint ownership, even a letter from the bank confirming their shared accounts. "This is highly irregular," Pierce said finally. "The federal policy is clear about the proper placement of indigenous persons." "The federal policy," Sam said carefully, "doesn't supersede the rights of married citizens. My wife is an American citizen by marriage, Marshal, and unless you have evidence of some crime, you have no authority here." Pierce's jaw tightened, but he knew Sam was right. "Very well," he said, "but I'll be filing a report about this situation. Don't think this is over." "Wouldn't dream of it," Sam said. After the marshal left, Sam and Aiyana stood on the porch watching the dust cloud disappear down the road. They wore their wedding rings, lived in their shared house, and bore the legal title of husband and wife. But what they really were was harder to define. "Any regrets?" Sam asked, echoing a question from years before. "Ask me in 10 years, Aiyana said with a smile. "When I know what kind of life we've built?" Sam smiled back. "I already know what kind of life we're building. We're building the kind where promises are kept, no matter what it costs." That evening, as they sat by the fire like they had countless times before, Aiyana spoke the words that had been on both their minds. "We'll make this work," she said. "We'll be partners, friends, family. And if the world wants to call us husband and wife, that's their business. We know what we are." "And what are we?" Sam asked. "We're two people who found each other when we needed it most," Aiyana said. "We're proof that family isn't just about blood, and love isn't just about romance. We're living proof that some promises are worth keeping, no matter how much the world changes around them." Outside, the Wyoming wind whispered across the prairie, carrying with it the scent of spring grass and distant storms. But inside the house that had become their sanctuary, Sam McKenna and Aiyana sat in comfortable silence, bound together by something stronger than law or convention or the expectations of others. They were bound by a promise made on the Cheyenne Trail 5 years ago, when a dying Apache girl met a lonely rancher who swore she